I can hear you. Can you do it again? So can somebody sing a simple melody for me? Like anything. Okay, well, next. It's doable, but next. That's all? That's all. That's quite interesting. Can you do it again? You prepared it beforehand, right? You had an idea. You didn't show up like that. Okay. Sounds like a lullaby. Well, I like it. It's nice. That's nice. I think it shows something that you can make music with very, very, very simple ideas. In jazz, we tend sometimes to feel that the more complex something is going to be, the better it's going to be. And I realized after a certain number of years falling into that trap repeatedly that it's not true, that sometimes simplicity is the key to many things. And so, for example, having a very simple melodic idea such as this one can lend lots of material. And of course, some of it was maybe more interesting than some others, because that in improvisation, that's the rule that not everything works equally, and you have no possibility of fixing what didn't work because it's in the air already, and that's what it is. But I find it very exhilarating to discover, and the more I improvise, the more I discover that very simple ideas can be extraordinary, can lend lots and lots of improvisational material, whereas sometimes very complex things just lend more complexity, but nothing really in terms of the real, what I call the music. You just make complex stuff, but in the process, sometimes you forget to make music. And to me, music, as old-fashioned as it seems, is based a lot on rhythm and melody. And if those ingredients are not there, and sometimes it tends to be the case when things get a little bit too complex, I feel like it can become quite gratuitous. And that leads me directly to the theme and improvisation subject. I basically, what happened once, it happened to me first, and then I work with my students on it. But first of all, by myself, I listen to lots of classical music. I still do. I love classical music. I wish I was a great classical player, but unfortunately it requires time, discipline, and memory and reading abilities that in my case, are not there 100%. So I'd rather be a good jazz musician than an average classical player. But I play lots of classical music for my enjoyment at home, and, in my office or anywhere I can. And I've always been fascinated by theme and variations, because some of the best music I know has been written under that form. When you think, for example, of the Goldberg variations, of course, or when you think of the Diabelli variations by Beethoven, when you think of Mozart's sonata, the one, and of course, stuff like that. It's not a sonata, but we don't care. Brahms, Rachmaninoff, Schubert, all those great, great musicians used that as to fire their creativity and came with incredible pieces. And I know lots of musicians, for example, who are fascinated by the Goldberg variation, and rightly so, by the Glenn Gould version, etc., etc. I think he was Canadian, right? Yeah, right. So anyway, at some point I started thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if I just improvise the way I always do? I always love to improvise. But do theme and variation. Just find a theme like yours, for example. Something simple, something that lends itself to lots of transformation, and then try a number of very unlikely things on it, like I did on yours. Some of it was a little, I stretched it a little bit, right? And I discovered I love to do it. Then I went a little bit further, and I said, why wouldn't I use a standard? Why wouldn't I play like a standard, like All the Things You Are, or What Did They Think of Love, or Mood Indigo, or When the Saints Come Marching In, you name it, and do a series of variations. The first variation could be slow, the second one could be fast, the third one could be minor instead of major, the way classical musicians did. So I did that for my enjoyment. And then I asked myself the question that I always ask myself when I make music is, who did that? So that I can find examples. When I play a tune, I like to hear other versions of that tune to see what, Bill Evans or Bud Paul or Art Tatum and others did with that tune, so that I can be traumatized and then try to improve in the process, And I couldn't find anything. I was like, nobody does it. then I thought of the Nobel Prize, you know. I said, maybe, you know, I mean, there's something there on the way to the Nobel Prize. So I basically discovered that there are a couple of exceptions. I think Lee Konitz did an album like that, but it's exceedingly rare. What do jazz musicians do? They take a standard, like I would say, you know, let's take What Is This Thing Called Love, which I like as a variation thing. Actually, my latest album is a solo album, and it's a 32 variation on What Is This Thing Called Love. So you see, I really like to do it. So, you know, the famous Cole Porter song. So then a jazz musician, what is he going to do? He's going to... etc. So what he's going to do, or she's going to do, is take that tune and use the chord progression, essentially the chord progression, a little bit the melody maybe, but essentially the chord progression, to build a single variation. A single variation with the same tempo, same vibe, same everything, you know, same key. It's very linear. And at the end, when he's done, or she's done, then we have the final aria, you know. And I suddenly realized, why does everybody do this and only this? Wouldn't it be interesting to play just one form, then stop, then play a form in a completely different way, then stop, then play a form in a completely different way? And that's how I became a little obsessed by it, because I realized that my creativity was working very differently when I did that compared to when I played jazz normally, if I may say, you know. So I did it, and I realized that I was discovering an enormous amount of things in the process. I'll go back to that later when I talk about conditioning. So about one thing I would like to emphasize is that those theme and variation thing can be on different scales. For example, what I did on your little melody, it's on a very small motive, you know. So if I, for example, I find a motive like inside of What Is This Thing Called Love, for example, I find a motif such as, no, that's not good. Something like that. I could do like, so I can build a whole form, or maybe even several, using that little thing. So some people call that motivic development. So that's one of the ways to call it. You know. Oh, no, sorry. Actually, that's what it is. I would have done this, but you know, I mean, he was Beethoven, he knew what he was doing after. So in the first movement of the Fifth Symphony, out of those, that's 4 notes, right? Out of those 4 notes, Beethoven builds a whole movement. It's, of course, incredibly amazing. So people call it motivic development, but I like to call it variation. It's already variations on a small thing. He takes it and he does this and he does then later something else, and then in the development he uses it this or that way, and he does. If you listen to that movement, it's really a succession of short variations on a single melody, on a single pattern, on a single motif, or whatever you call it, doesn't really matter, on a single word. It's like different ways of saying the same word over and over again. So it's already, in a way, the theme and variation process. And I discovered that by improvising like this on one very simple idea, like, such as I did on What Is This Thing Called Love, I was already doing something that many jazz musicians never do, which is keep an idea and develop it. Because in general, what jazz musicians tend to do is go to 5,000 different places, you know. Go there, go this, go there. It changes all the time. You know, they're always scared of keeping an idea because they're like, everybody's going to bore, they're going to leave the club or something, you know. And so they keep changing. And I realized that with a very simple idea like that, just by changing pitch, like going this, changing the interval, like etc. Always on the basis of what I hear. You know, it's not a scientific thing. In my case, it's what I hear. I could actually play for 10 minutes. At the beginning, I was afraid to do it on stage, and I realized that when I did it on stage, it was really great because the idea was bringing me forward, you know, all the time. And when I was playing with other musicians, they were following the idea. It was almost like this invisible thread, you know. And people in the room get really hypnotized. They're like, you know, because they have this idea that comes again and again. They don't have to navigate all that ocean of changes and complexity and elaborate pattern. They have this idea that they can hang to, and it's great when you're a listener to have that. We have that when we listen to any of Beethoven's pieces, you know, or most of them. So I did it on stage, and it relaxed me. It's also great to recharge the creative batteries because, okay, this is the idea that I'm going to use, you know. You know what you have to do. You have a limited field. And that's why I call it conditioning. You condition yourself. You're like, okay, now I'm going to improvise only on this idea. It's very, 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 it makes you feel secure in a way. And at some point, the idea plays itself. You don't even play anymore. That's the state that you're looking for. And so I did it more and more, and I do it a lot now, and I think it's a great way of making music. Instead of destroying what you've done the bar before or the next bar all the time. You know what I'm saying? So that's a little bit, I would say the short-scale version of theme and variation. Then after that comes the longer-term version. So that, for example, at this point, I'd rather talk in music. So assuming I'm going to play the melody of What Is This Thing Called Love once in a very straightforward way. So even though I follow the melody pretty faithfully, I can still have fun with the rest, you know what I'm saying? The chords and the bass and stuff like that, orchestrated in a certain way. Then I could say, okay, let's do variation 1. So I'm going to do something that I never do, but I'm going to try to do it for you. I'm going to tell you before I do it what I'm going to do. Sometimes it happens inside of my brain, so I guess I just have to vocalize it. So I would say first variation, very simple, repeated note, but strange repeated note, something that doesn't really quite work in theory. Stay very close to the melody, give a very clear time to it, because that's the problem that many people, when they improvise, they lose sight of the time, and it's always rubato, you know. Give a very simple, very clear time, and just see what I can do with that repeated note and the melody. So it's going to be a very simple first variation. So you see, on the bridge of the tune, I didn't feel like keeping that note. I was like, something else must happen. I went to F sharp. Why? I don't know. I heard it. But I felt like, well, that should work. So it gives a tune that's very different from what Cole Porter had in mind, but it's still What Is This Thing Called Love, right? Now I could say second variation is going to be like a medium-fast jazz solo with just two voices, bass and right hand, like horn, almost like a Lenny Tristano type of thing, you know. The challenge in every variation is I have to stop. Jazz musicians don't know how to stop. Coltrane once said, Miles once said Coltrane, when he asked Miles, how can I stop my solo there like an hour long? He said, just remove the horn out of your mouth. It's one way to do it, so I could eventually do. But then why? You know, why? So the thing is, I have, when I do a variation, I have to look forward. I have to know where I'm going. You know, I know that if I go there, well, it's not going to be good, you know. Well, it's not too high, but still. So I have to, okay, stop at the right place. So you have to have a sense of distance. You have to have a sense of cycle. So it cannot just be the chord progression. And here I'm not really taking the chord progression much into account in either of those two variations. I was really playing more on the form. But that form is 32 bars. I have to feel those 32 bars as if it was like this distance. Okay, I know I have to stop there. This way I can finish my variation with some little pun like this and not be like, oh man, it's finished, you know? I'm not surprised. I know it's coming. I can see it come. I actually have a vision of it before it happens. When you say a sentence, you know what you mean before you say the sentence. When you say the first word of the sentence, you already know what you want to say. If you're looking for what you want to say in the middle of your sentence, then the only thing you can do is read speeches. I don't want to go on politics today. So that's an important thing. So now those two variations were as different from each other as they could possibly be. But now there are so many other possibilities. I could say I'm going to do a what is this thing called love, kind of a Bach type of thing, you know? So you're going to tell me what does it have to do with the original tune, right? Well, the original tune is on my mind all the time, which means I'm hearing. So as strange as it seems, while I'm playing this, I have a stereo here playing the tune, which is why I'm having some mental issues sometimes. So anyway, it's a strange experience. So it's almost like the tune is inspiring you, but you're not playing it. You're playing something inspired by it while it's in your mind. And I'm not the first one to do that. I didn't invent that. What Beethoven did in some of his Diabellis, or what Bach did in some of his Goldbergs, were incredibly far from the original melody, especially in the case of the Diabelli, because I don't know if you know the story, but the tune of the Diabelli, like was sent to a number of composers by Diabelli. That was the name of the poor, unfortunate composer. He sent that to Schubert, Beethoven, and quite a few unknowns. I mean, maybe none at the time, but not now anymore. And Beethoven received it, said, this tune is horrible. I can't, what? So he said, no, thank you. Then, perhaps because he was bored, or perhaps because he wanted to just challenge himself, he started writing variation. Of course, some of them have strictly nothing to do with the poor Diabelli thing, except they do. Except they still are inspired by it, as incredible as it seems. Because in that case, the base material was really very poor, which is not the case here. So he sent that to Diabelli, who almost had a heart attack when he read because it's like one of the biggest, most incredible piece of piano music ever written, and the last piano music piece ever written by Beethoven, with the exception of a couple of bagatelles, I believe. And Schubert actually never wanted his published because he saw Beethoven's ones, and he said, okay, you know what? Poor Schubert, as much of a genius as he was, just like, wow, you know? So when I do that, I'm basically doing something that's been done centuries ago. I'm not inventing anything, which means I'm taking a tune, and I do a variation inspired by the tune, but which is not the tune. I mean, you can still hear the tune in it, in the way it moves, in the way some of the notes move, some of the chords, some whatever. And the interesting thing is, to me at least, is nobody has ever played What Did They Think of Love like this. And nobody ever will again, because it's such an unusual way to do it, at least in the jazz idiom. So maybe another variation could be just play on the chords for a change. So. With a little tag, because I couldn't add on time, so I went, okay, I'm going to add a tag, you know. Okay, when I say I played on the chord, maybe I was anticipating a little bit wrong, but I played it in a rather traditional way, at least compared to the previous two takes, to the previous three takes, I believe. So here I'm just like playing like a jazz musician, but still it's very different, because I have only one form. And because you know, because I want to do that one form and that variation that makes sense, I'm using only one ID. So I'm back to that one ID thing that I talked about, the Fifth Symphony thing, you know. And that's why conditioning and variations relate to each other so narrowly, that when you do a variation, it's almost like already a conditioning thing. Okay, I'm going to do the variation. It has to be this. You know, like when you see a variation by Beethoven or Mozart, there is really an idea behind each variation that makes it sound like one thing. And because it's so short, it really has to have that consistency, you know. So you really have to condition yourself. You can be just, oh, I'm going to play one form. Because, you know, then you go back, it's exactly like taking a solo, except to change tempos and keys, but you don't have that consistency. You don't have that. Each variation has to be a piece of music in its own right, so you need to condition yourself. And so now it touches to another thing that I really like to talk about, and I won't do it very long today, unfortunately, is improvisation is instant composition. Many classical musicians in the past have criticized improvisation, saying that it was just, like automatic, what comes through your mind. Yeah, that's true in a way, but it's also instant composition. I'm sure like geniuses such as Beethoven, Schubert, Mozart, Chopin, etc., when they improvised, it really sounded like something. It was just not like, finger work. So when I improvise like that, my goal, which I don't always achieve, of course, is I want to create a piece of music. I just don't want to move my fingers. If I need to move my finger, I can type on my computer, But I want to create a piece of music in the moment. By doing a variation like that, it becomes almost like it's only that. I need to create a piece of music. If you improvise on a bandstand with other musicians, you can easily be like, oh man, we're having fun, this is great, man, yeah, play that drums, man, yeah, it's great, yeah. And then before you know it, you're not making music anymore. It's like, the Olympic Games of whatever. And it can be fun. I'm not saying it's not good, it can be wonderful. It can actually give some great stuff. But it's different, So for me, that also pushed me to try, as an improviser, to discover my composing side. And since I'm not courageous enough to write Beethoven symphonies or Beethoven-like symphonies or Bruckner-like symphonies, that allows me to, express my composer component in the moment, with the risk that it doesn't always work, of course. And like a composer, I cannot review, correct, or discard what I did. So by doing those theme and variation things, I really can get closer to this, And that's another reason why I really like to do it. So one more thing I would like to show you after that, I think we'll be pretty much ready for some questions, if you have any. I want to show you that theme and variation is not restricted to improvisation. It can also be in composition itself. So when I say I was not a composer, I'm still a composer in the jazz way, which means, I write, lead sheets, And this is a tune that I wrote a while ago called Forever. And actually, that tune is 4 sections. But it's actually a theme and variation, And I'm going to try and play it for you in its complete version. And you will see that each section is written, but I improvise on it, which means I never play the same way. And because of its form, it's really like, okay, I have this first variation, I have this second variation, I have this third, I have this fourth one. And then I can build my tune like that, instead of being what is usually the case. Oh, I play the head, then chord progression, so that I can show all my patterns, and then head out. That's not what it is. Here it's really a theme and variation type of thing. And again, it's not been done very often in jazz. It does exist. I'm not the only one ever to have done it, but it's not that often that you hear something based on the theme and variation thing in a jazz composition. So I'm going to try to play it. This is because I have an extremely bad memory, which is good for an improviser. Memory is the improviser's worst enemy. Because you improvise and then you remember it and then you stop improvising, you redo it. By forgetting, I make myself improvise all the time. You see what I'm saying? Does it make sense? The guy from Memento, the movie, he improvises all the time, Same. Thank you. Before the Q&A, I would like to do a last variation on What is this thing called love? I don't know what. I had it in my system. I needed to just take it out. Otherwise, I would have it all night, you know, wake up sweating, and, you know, it's not good. Thank you. I have to tell you, I've never played music and talked so much in the same time. It's a very it's a special experience.
Special improvisation skills.
I'm glad I did it. Now I'm going to go
And the name of his book is all about the music, the art and heart of improvisation. So check it out. So please come back February 1st. Robert Haskell will be giving a talk here on echoes and transformation in music, and come back and see us in February. Thanks.